Welcome to the deep dive. We are really thrilled you could join us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our mission for this session is simple, but the subject matter we are tackling is, well, it's incredibly rich.
Oh, it really is.
We are taking a single source, the Wikipedia biography of Eddie Anderson, who you might know as Rochester, and we're going to extract the most fascinating aha moments for you.
Right, because if you think you know this man solely as a famous comedic sidekick from the golden age of radio, you are in for a major surprise today.
Totally. We are talking about a millionaire, a civil rights trailblazer,
An inventor?
a racehorse owner.
Yes, a racehorse owner, and even a World War II factory owner.
Exactly. Because this deep dive, it isn't just a chronological timeline of a Hollywood actor. We're really looking at a blueprint. This is the story of how one man leveraged a massive pop culture platform to quietly break down systemic racial barriers and build a personal empire. And he did it all while making America laugh.
Which is an incredible needle to thread. It is a masterclass in navigating a deeply segregated era, doing it with immense talent, business savvy, and just undeniable resilience.
I want to kick things off with a detail about Anderson's early life that completely reframed how I look at his career.
Go for it.
When you think of Eddie Anderson, you immediately think of that iconic, gravelly voice.
Right.
Oh, instantly. It's legendary.
It was his trademark. It was a thing that made him instantly recognizable on the radio. But the surprising part is that his voice wasn't an act.
No, not at all.
He didn't put it on for the microphone. He actually permanently ruptured his vocal cords as a child.
It's such a wild origin
He
story.
was working in the streets of San Francisco selling newspapers, and the job required so much loud shouting just to cut through the street noise and get people's attention that he permanently damaged his vocal cords.
And the very thing that gave him his unique star-making quality was born out of pure childhood survival.
Just hustle.
It really grounds his story in reality right from the start, doesn't it?
It does. And to really understand that hustle, you have to look at his family roots. He was born Edmund Lincoln Anderson in Oakland, California in 1905.
Right.
And show business was quite literally in his blood. His father, Big Ed Anderson, was a minstrel performer.
Right, which carries a lot of historical weight.
It absolutely does. Now, for those who might not be familiar, minstrel shows were a hugely popular form of entertainment in the 19th and early 20th centuries, but they were deeply, deeply rooted in racial caricatures.
Yeah.
Black performers were often forced to lean into highly exaggerated, demeaning stereotypes just to make a living on the stage.
Just to work.
Exactly. So understanding that makes Eddie's later ability to carve out a more nuanced, powerful space in entertainment even more striking.
And his mom was in the business too, right?
She was. His mother, Ella May, had this incredibly daring profession. She was a tightrope walker.
Wow.
Yeah, at least until a severe fall tragically ended her career.
And beyond those theatrical roots, there's a profound historical anchor here too. The source material mentions that Anderson described himself as a descendant of enslaved people who managed to escape the South during the Civil War via the Underground Railroad.
Yes.
So from the very beginning, you are looking at a family history defined by incredible risk, survival, and escaping oppressive systems to build a new life in California.
Precisely. And that drive to survive, it kicked in really early for Eddie. His family moved to San Francisco when he was 10, and by the time he was 14, he had to leave school altogether.
He had to go to work.
Right. He started working as an errand boy just to help put food on the table. But he was completely stage struck.
He couldn't shake it.
He couldn't. He spent his free time waiting at stage doors, absorbing everything he could. He performed on street corners with his brother. He even tried to be a jockey for a bit.
Oh, right. The horse racing connection starts early.
It does. But he eventually had to abandon that dream because he just grew too heavy for the horses.
So he pivoted. He hit the vaudeville circuit as a dancer, winning an amateur contest and joining all African-American touring revues, just grinding it out night after night.
Building those chops.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. He goes from a teenager dancing in vaudeville to experiencing a monumental breakthrough in radio. How exactly does a vaudeville dancer land a role that fundamentally changes the history of American broadcasting?
Well, it started with what was supposed to be a single temporary gig. In 1937, Anderson auditioned for and won a one-off role on the Jack Benny program.
And we really need to set the scene for how huge Jack Benny was at this time.
Oh, Jack Benny was a titan of radio. In the 1930s, network radio was the center of American culture. It was essentially the equivalent of primetime television and the Super Bowl combined.
Millions of families gathering around their living room sets.
Yes, and Anderson was hired simply to play a train redcap.
A baggage porter.
Right. Redcap was the term for the railway baggage porters who worked at stations back then. It was a common working-class job for black men at the time, and Anderson was just brought in for a brief storyline where Benny's cast was traveling from Chicago to California.
But he was so good that 5 weeks later, they called him back to play a waiter.
And then a few weeks after that, a different character who gets into a financial dispute with Benny.
And the audience just went wild for him. The network was flooded with fan mail. People loved his guest appearances so much that Jack Benny realized he couldn't let him go.
He had to lock him down.
So Benny hired him permanently to play the character of Rochester Van Jones, his valet and butler.
And we really need to pause here and emphasize the sheer magnitude of this moment. By securing that permanent role, Eddie Anderson became the first African-American to have a regular, recurring role on a nationwide radio program.
It's huge.
It's completely unprecedented. In 1937, to have a permanent, prominent role on a broadcast of that size. He was stepping into living rooms across a deeply segregated America every single week.
And the dynamic between Anderson and Benny wasn't just magic on the airwaves. Their real-life dynamic behind the scenes was fascinating, too.
Oh, it was hilarious.
Anderson was notoriously, habitually late to rehearsals and broadcast. It drove Benny crazy.
Benny actually instituted a policy where he would fine Anderson $50 every single time he arrived late to the studio.
Which, $50 in the 1930s was a significant amount of money.
It was a ton of money. It got to the point where Benny would assign other cast members to go check on Anderson before they had to travel, just to make sure he hadn't lost track of time.
Which really shows how indispensable he was. They literally couldn't do the show without him.
Exactly. Sometimes the cast had to leave for a train without him.
One of the wildest anecdotes from the source material is the time Anderson was running so late to catch a train at the Pasadena station that he somehow managed to convince an LAPD motorcycle squad to give him a high-speed escort through the city streets.
Just so he wouldn't miss the departure.
Yes. Sirens blaring just to catch his train.
It sounds like a comedy sketch, but it speaks to his immense popularity. And that popularity wasn't just local to Los Angeles either.
Right.
In 1940, Anderson was scheduled to appear at an event at Harvard University. Well, students from their rival school, MIT, decided to pull a prank that delayed his arrival.
Then what happened?
The result was that his absence caused an actual riot among the students waiting to see him.
That is wild.
That is how deeply ingrained the Rochester character had become in the American psyche. After World War II, his popularity was second only to Jack Benny himself, and Anderson routinely got the loudest, longest applause from the studio audience during broadcasts.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is how the character of Rochester evolved over time, reflecting a rapidly changing cultural landscape in America.
Because it didn't start out perfect.
No, looking back at his early radio days, the humor leaned heavily on the racial stereotypes that were standard in the entertainment industry at the time. There were frequent running gags about his gambling habits, carrying a razor, and his role as a butler was inherently subservient.
But the show didn't stay stagnant, which is what makes this partnership so unique.
Mm-hmm.
According to Jack Benny's posthumous autobiography, there was a major conscious shift after World War II. When the enormity and the profound horrors of the Holocaust were revealed to the world, Benny and his writers were deeply affected.
They really were.
They made a deliberate effort to strip the stereotypical aspects away from the Rochester character. Benny laid down a strict rule that no racial jokes or demeaning references were to be used on his show ever again.
Which was a massive risk. You have to remember, this was a top-rated comedy show in the late 1940s. The conventional wisdom in broadcasting was that you do not mess with a winning formula.
Don't fix what isn't broken.
Exactly. But Benny and Anderson elevated the character anyway. Rochester became less of a subservient valet and much more of an equal comedic partner.
He was often the smartest guy in the room.
Right. He was the one who saw through Benny's cheapness and outsmarted him constantly.
So how did the audience react to that shift? Did they actually notice that the stereotypes were gone?
They noticed immediately. In fact, we know this because of a specific incident in 1950.
What happened?
The writers were short on time one week, and they decided to reuse an old script from 1940. And because it was an older script, it contained some of those outdated stereotypical jokes.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, when it aired, the response was swift. Listeners wrote angry letters to the network protesting the stereotypes.
That is incredible.
It was a clear sign that the public's tolerance for that kind of humor had significantly diminished. It proved that the audience was evolving right alongside them, and that Benny and Anderson's efforts to modernize the character were deeply resonating with the American public.
That partnership extended far beyond the radio scripts, too. Off-screen, Benny and Anderson shared a profound bond, and Benny was fiercely protective of Anderson.
Absolutely.
In an era of Jim Crow laws and systemic segregation, Benny refused to let Anderson be treated as a second-class citizen.
Yeah, there are a few really powerful stories about that.
There was an incident in St. Joseph, Missouri, where a hotel tried to deny Anderson a room because of his race. Benny didn't just complain to the manager, he threatened to pull his entire company out of the hotel immediately.
And the hotel backed down.
They had to. And we see that same solidarity again in New York.
Right, the New York hotel incident. A hotel manager tried to relocate Anderson to a different floor because a white couple from the South complained about staying under the same roof as a black man.
And Jack Benny's response to that is legendary.
Think about the logistics of what he did next. He packed up his entire cast and crew, 44 people in total, and moved them all out of the hotel.
Moving 44 people out of a New York hotel at a moment's notice is a logistical nightmare.
It is, and it's a massive financial flex. Benny used his significant economic power and industry weight to draw a line in the sand. That level of solidarity in the 1940s was rare and incredibly powerful.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Anderson wasn't just relying on Jack Benny's wealth or protection, he was building an immense fortune of his own.
Oh, yes, he was.
By the 1950s, he was the highest-paid African-American actor in the country, earning an astonishing $100,000 a year.
To put that in perspective, that was lottery-level money at the time.
He invested that wealth incredibly wisely, to the point where, in 1962, Ebony magazine featured him on their list of the 100 wealthiest African Americans.
But he didn't just sit on that wealth or limit himself to Hollywood.
Oh, he became a wildly successful businessman, a political advocate, and an industrialist.
This is perhaps my favorite part of his story because it highlights his brilliant use of capital. During World War II, the Benny Show frequently toured military bases to entertain the troops. But because the United States armed forces were strictly segregated, Anderson was often barred from staying in the military barracks with the rest of the cast.
He was sidelined.
Exactly. So he found another much bigger way to contribute. He financed and owned the Pacific Parachute Company.
Let's really dig into that.
Yeah.
He didn't just donate money to a cause. He built a factory.
He built a factory. The Pacific Parachute Company was an African-American owned and operated business located in San Diego. They manufactured parachutes for the Army and the Navy.
That is a massive achievement.
He was providing crucial supplies to the war effort while simultaneously creating vital manufacturing jobs and empowering the Black community economically at a time when defense industry jobs were heavily segregated.
It's an incredible pivot from being an entertainer to being a wartime defense contractor.
Truly.
And his advocacy extended into local politics, too. In the 1930s and 40s, the Central Avenue area of Los Angeles was the cultural epicenter of the Black community on the West Coast. And the community held mock elections to elect an honorary mayor of Central Avenue. It was meant to be someone who could be a highly visible voice and an advocate for the neighborhood's interests.
And in 1940, Anderson ran for the position.
And he didn't treat it as a novelty.
No, he ran a serious, issue-driven campaign from the Dunbar Hotel. Specifically, he used his massive platform to advocate for Black military aviators.
He even took flying lessons himself, right?
He did, and he lectured alongside representatives from the Tuskegee Institute to promote the integration of the Air Corps.
Wow.
He won that election, proving he could use his celebrity to push for real-world systemic change.
But when he wasn't running wartime factories or political campaigns, the man was a total adrenaline junkie.
Oh, completely.
He loved building model airplanes and racing cars. But he took it to the next level in 1951 when he designed his own life-size sports car.
I love this detail.
He took a heavy-duty Cadillac engine, dropped it under the hood, and designed a custom, sleek, low-slung exterior. He actually toured it around sports car shows across the country.
He had style.
And his wealth allowed him to indulge in being on the water, too. He was the skipper of his own cabin cruiser, though that hobby almost cost him his life.
Yes, the 1946 boat incident.
Right. In February of 1946, his boat developed severe engine trouble, and he and two friends were literally lost at sea.
Adrift in the Pacific Ocean.
All night. They had to frantically signal an SOS, using mirrors, lighting fires, waving lanterns, and flying the ship's flag upside down to show they were in distress.
Just doing everything they could.
Finally, a fishing boat spotted them and towed them safely back to Los Angeles harbor. But the irony of it all is that Anderson had no idea he was the subject of a massive Coast Guard search until he made it back to dry land and heard a news story about himself on the radio.
It sounds like an adventure movie script, but it was just a weekend in the life of Eddie Anderson. His hobbies were as large as his personality, and that included a deep, serious passion for horse racing.
Right, going back to his early jockey days.
Exactly. He wasn't just placing bets at the track, he owned a stable of racehorses.
And his most famous horse was a thoroughbred named Burnt Cork. In 1943, Burnt Cork ran in the Kentucky Derby.
This was a profoundly historic moment. Eddie Anderson became the first African-American owner to enter a horse in the Kentucky Derby.
We really need to set the scene for America in 1943 to understand the weight of this. The military is segregated. Jim Crow laws are in full violent effect across the South.
Right.
Yet here is a black man, wealthy enough from his own labor and talent, participating as an owner in one of the most elite, traditionally white, Southern sporting events in the country.
He even showed up to the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer studio lot dressed as a Kentucky colonel when Burnt Cork won an important qualifying race, insisting people call him Colonel Rochester.
I love that. It was a brilliant, subversive piece of performance art.
It was magnificent. But this event also starkly highlights the painful duality of his life.
How so?
Well, on one hand, he possesses the immense wealth and the elite status required to own a Derby horse. On the other hand, the reality of systemic racism was inescapable. When Anderson and his wife traveled to Louisville, Kentucky to watch his own horse run in the Derby, they were barred from staying in any of the major hotels.
Unbelievable.
They had to find lodging with a prominent black politician named May Street Kid. It perfectly encapsulates the friction of his existence. He's reaching the absolute highest peaks of American society, yet he's still being forced to navigate the degrading barriers of segregation.
But that friction didn't stop him from pushing boundaries, especially when it came to where he wanted to live and raise his family.
No, it didn't.
Like many successful African Americans in entertainment, Anderson wanted to live in the West Adams district of Los Angeles, specifically an affluent area that was becoming known as Sugar Hill.
Right.
He wanted a luxurious mansion built by the famous pioneering black architect Paul Williams.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this wasn't just a story about a rich celebrity buying a nice house. This was a structural battleground. In the 1940s, as the black entertainment community began purchasing homes in Sugar Hill, some white property owners reacted by heavily enforcing restrictive covenants on their property deeds.
For those who might not know, what exactly is a restrictive covenant in this context?
A restrictive covenant was a legally binding clause written directly into the deed of a property designed entirely to prohibit black people, and often other minorities, from purchasing or inhabiting properties in those neighborhoods.
Wow.
It was a primary tool of redlining and systemic segregation in northern and western cities. So Anderson wanted his dream home, but his choice of location was severely limited by these racist legal clauses.
He ultimately built a massive, luxurious home with a swimming pool, but it had to be situated in an area surrounded by smaller, bungalow-style homes because of those neighborhood restrictions.
But Anderson and his peers in Sugar Hill didn't just accept this structural racism. They fought back.
They bought property anyway.
Exactly, directly and deliberately challenging these covenants in court. And their defiance wasn't just a local dispute. It was part of a broader national movement that eventually made its way to the highest court in the land.
And that led to a massive legal victory.
It did. In 1948, the U.S. Supreme Court made a landmark ruling declaring that these restrictive housing covenants were unenforceable and illegal.
Anderson was living on the front lines of civil rights history, using his wealth and his status to force the legal system to change.
And as a beautiful postscript to that battle, the street his house was built on was later renamed after his character. It became Rochester Circle.
That is amazing. So what does this all mean? When we look at the totality of the source material we've covered today, Anderson's life really is a masterclass in leveraging a single foot in the door.
It really is.
He took a one-off comedic bit part playing a baggage porter on a radio show, and he turned it into lasting generational wealth.
He became a pioneer for representation in media, a business owner funding the war effort, and an advocate pushing against segregation in housing and hospitality.
And his legacy wasn't just about accumulating wealth for himself. It was deeply rooted in giving back.
Mm-hmm.
In a final philanthropic gesture before his death from heart disease in 1977, Anderson willed his massive Los Angeles home to be used as a shelter.
The Rochester house.
Exactly. It opened to help troubled men transition back into society and provided a safe haven for victims of substance abuse.
This raises an important question for all of us. We usually think of historical progress as being driven solely by politicians giving speeches, lawyers arguing in courtrooms, or activists marching in the streets.
Right, the traditional avenues of power.
But Eddie Anderson's life shows us the incredible subversive power of pop culture.
Yeah.
If a comedian playing a radio valet could inadvertently force the integration of hotels, fund wartime parachute factories, break barriers at the Kentucky Derby, and completely change the way an entire nation viewed racial dynamics simply through laughter and undeniable talent.
That makes you wonder.
Exactly. How much untapped power do the entertainers we consume today hold to reshape our modern society, and are we asking enough of them to use that power?
That is a phenomenal point. It is something to seriously consider the next time you tune into your favorite show.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep exploring the history behind the culture, and we will catch you next time.